Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Star Wars. We are on page 198, chapter 11. Dazed, Luke staggered toward the front of the ship. He barely noticed the sound of energy bolts, too weak to penetrate the ship's deflectors, exploding harmlessly outside. His own safety was currently of little concern to him. With misty eyes, he stared at as Chewbacca and Solo adjusted controls. "I hope that old man managed to knock out that tractor beam," the Corellian was saying, "or this is going to be a very short ride." Ignoring him, Luke returned to the hold area and slumped into a seat, his head falling into his hands. Yeah. Leia Organa regarded him quietly for a while, then removed her cloak. Moving to him, she placed it gently around his shoulders. "There wasn't anything you could have done," she whispered comfortingly. "It was all over in an instant." "I can't believe he's gone," came Luke's reply, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "I can't." Solo shifted a lever. Or do you say lever? Staring nervously ahead, but the massive bay door was constructed to respond to the approach of any vessel. The safety feature now served to facilitate their escape as the freighter slipped quickly past the still opening door and out into free space. "Nothing," Solo sighed, studying several readouts with a profound satisfaction. "Not so much as a erg of come hither. He did it all right." Chewbacca rumbled something, and the pilot's attention shifted to another series of gauges. "Right, Chewie, I forgot for a moment that there are other ways of persuading us to return." His teeth flashed in a grin of determination, "but the only way they'll get us back is the traveling tomb in pieces. Take over." Whirling, he ran out of the cockpit. "Come with me, kid," he shouted at Luke as he entered the hold. We're not out of this yet." "I don't know what's going on today." An explosion jarred the ship, nearly tumbling Solo to the deck. Wait, what? No, I skipped a line or two. Let's see. Luke didn't respond. There we go. Didn't move, and Leia turned an angry face to Solo. "Leave him alone. Can't you see what that old man meant to him?" An explosion jarred the ship, nearly tumbling Solo to the deck. "So what? The old man gave himself to give us a chance to get away. You want to waste that, Luke? You want Kenobi to have wasted himself?" I'm reminded of Grand Theft Auto. Never mind. Luke's head came up, and he stared with vacant eyes at the Corellian. No, not quite vacant. There was something too old and unpleasant shining blindly in the back of them. Without a word, he threw off the cloak and joined Solo. Giving him a reassuring smile, Solo gestured down a narrow accessway. Luke looked in the indicated direction, smiled grimly, and rushed down to it as Solo started down the opposing passage. Luke found himself in a large rotating bubble protruding from the side of the ship, a long, wicked-looking tube whose purpose was instantly apparent, projected from the apex of the transparent hemisphere. Luke settled himself into the seat and commenced a rapid study of the controls. Activator here, firing grip here. He had fired such weapons 1,000 times before, in his dreams. Forward, Chewbacca and Leia were searching the speckled pit outside for the attacking fighters, represented by fire pricks on several screens. Chewbacca suddenly growled throatily and pulled back on several controls as Leia let out a yelp. "Here they come." The starfield wheeled around, and Luke as an Imperial TIE fighter raced toward him and then swung overhead to vanish into the distance. Within the tiny cockpit, its pilot frowned as the supposedly battered freighter darted out of range. Adjusting his own controls, he swung up and over in a high arc, intended to take him on a fresh intercept course with the escaping ship. Solo fired at another fighter, and its pilot nearly slammed his engine through its mountings as he fought to avoid the powerful energy bolts. As he did so, his hurried maneuver brought him under and around to the other side of the freighter. Even as he was lowering the glare reflector over his eyes, Luke opened up on the racing fighter. Chewbacca was alternating his attention between the instruments and the tracking screens, while Leia strained to separate distant stars from nearby assassins. Two fighters dove simultaneously on the twisting, spiraling freighter. trying to line their weapons on the unexpectedly flexible craft? I would imagine so. Solo fired at the descending globes, and Luke followed with his own weapon a second later. Both fired on the starship and then shot past. "They're coming in too fast!" Luke yelled into his comlink. Another energy bolt struck the freighter forward and was barely shunted aside by its deflectors. The cockpit shuddered suddenly, and gauges whined in protest at the quantity of energy where they were being asked to monitor and compensate for. Chewbacca muttered something to Leia, and she murmured a soft, "Dang it," reply as if she almost understood. Another fighter unloosed a barrage on the freighter, only this time the bolt pierced an overloaded screen and actually struck the side of the ship. Though partially deflected, it still carried enough power to blow out a large control panel in the main passageway, sending a rain of sparks and smoke in all directions. R2-D2 started stolidly toward the miniature inferno as the ship lurched crazily, throwing the less stable 3PO into a cabinet full of component chips. A warning light began to wink for attention in the cockpit. Chewbacca muttered to Leia, who stared at him worriedly and wished for the gift of Wookiee Gab. Or Gabe, I don't know. Then a fighter floated down on the damaged freighter, right into Luke's sights. His mouth moving silently, Luke fired at it. The incredibly agile little vessel darted out of his range, but as it passed beneath them, Solo picked it up instantly and commenced a steady following fire. Without warning, the fighter erupted into an incredible flash of multicolored light, throwing a billion bits of superheated metal to every section of the cosmos. Solo whirled and gave Luke a victory wave, which the younger men gleefully returned. Then they turned back to their weapons, and as yet another fighter stormed over the freighter's hull, firing at its transmitter dish. In the middle of the main passageway, angry flames raged around a stubby cylindrical shape. A fine white powdery spray issued from R2-D2's head. Wherever it touched, the fire retreated sharply. Luke tried to relax to become a part of the weapon. Almost without being aware of it, he was firing at a retreating Imperial. When he blinked, it was to see the flaming fragments of the enemy craft forming a perfect ball of light outside the turret. It was his turn to spin and flash the Corellian a grin of triumph. In the cockpit, Leia paid close attention to the scattered readouts as well as searching the sky for additional ships. She directed her voice toward an open mic. "There's still 2 more of them out there. Looks like we've lost the lateral monitors and the starboard deflector shield." "Don't worry," Solo told her with as much hope as confidence. "She'll hold together." He gave the walls a pleading stare. "You hear me, ship? Hold together." Yeah, I would do the same thing. "Chewie, try to keep them on our port side if we..." He was forced to break off as a TIE fighter seemed to materialize out of nowhere, energy bolts reaching out from it toward him. Its companion craft came up on the freighter's other side, and Luke found himself firing steadily at it, ignoring the immensely powerful energy it threw at him. At the last possible instant before it passed out of range, he swung the weapon's nozzle minutely, his finger tightening convulsively on the fire control. The Imperial fighter turned into a rapidly expanding cloud of phosphorescing dust. The other fighter, apparently considered the shrunken odds, turned and retreated at top speed. "We've made it!" Leia shouted, turning to give the startled Wookiee an unexpected hug. He growled at her, very softly. Darth Vader strode into the control room, where Governor Tarkin stood staring at a huge, brilliantly lit screen. It displayed a sea of stars, but it was not the spectacular view which absorbed the governor's thoughts at the moment. He barely glanced around as Vader entered. "Are they away?" the Dark Lord demanded. "They've just completed the jump to hyperspace. No doubt they're at this very moment congratulating themselves on their daring and success." Now Tarkin turned to face Vader, a hint of warning in his tone. "I'm taking an awful chance on your insistence, Vader. This had better work. Are you certain the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship?" Vader exuded confidence beneath the reflective black mask. "There is nothing to fear. This will be a day long remembered. It already has been witness to the final extinction of the Jedi." Soon it will see the end of the Alliance and the Rebellion. I miss Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was probably my favorite character in the prequel trilogy. Solo switched places with Chewbacca, the Wookiee, grateful for the opportunity to relinquish Yu-Gi-Oh! The controls. As the Corellian moved aft to check the extent of the damage, a determined-looking Leia passed him in the corridor. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Solo inquired, well pleased with himself. "Not a bad bit of rescuing, you know. Sometimes I amaze even myself." "That doesn't sound too hard," she admitted readily. "The important thing is not my safety, but the fact that the information in the R2 unit is still intact." "What's that droid carrying that's so important anyway?" Uh-oh. Leia considered the blazing starfield forward. "Complete technical schematics of the battle station. I only hope that when the data is analyzed, a weakness can be found. Until then, until the station itself is destroyed, we must go on. The war isn't over yet." "It is for me," objected the pilot. "I'm not on this mission for your revolution. Economics interest me, not politics. There's business to be done under my government, and I'm not doing it for you, Princess. I expect to be well paid for risking my ship and my hide." "You needn't worry about your reward," she assured him sadly, turning to leave. "If money is what you love, that's what you'll receive." On leaving the cockpit, she saw Luke coming forward, and she spoke softly to him in passing. "Your friend is indeed a mercenary. I wonder if he really cares about anything, or anybody." Luke stared after her until she disappeared into the main hold area, then whispered, "I do. I care." Then he moved into the cockpit and sat in the seat Chewbacca had just vacated. "What do you think of her, Han?" Solo didn't hesitate. "I try not to." Luke probably hadn't intended his response to be audible, but Solo overheard his murmur of "good" nonetheless. "Still," Solo ventured thoughtfully, "she's got a lot of spirit to go with her sass." "I don't know. Do you think it's possible for a princess and a guy like me?" "No." Luke cut him off sharply. He turned and looked away. Solo smiled at the younger man's jealousy, uncertain in his own mind whether he added the comment just to bait his naive friend or because it was the truth. Yavin was not a habitable world. The huge gas giant was patterned with pastel high-altitude cloud formations. Here and there, the softly lambent atmosphere was molded by cyclonic storms composed of 600-kilometer-per-hour winds which boiled rolling gases up from the Yavinesque troposphere. It was a world of lingering beauty and quick death for any who might try to penetrate its comparatively small core of frozen liquids. Several of the giant planet's numerous moons, however, were planet-sized themselves, and of these 3 could support humanoid life. Particularly inviting was the satellite designed by the system's discoverers as Number 4. It shone like an emerald in Yavin's necklace of moons, rich with plant and animal life, but it was not listed among those worlds supporting human settlement. Yavin was located too far from the settled regions of the galaxy. Perhaps the latter reason, or both, or a combination of the causes still unknown, had been responsible for whatever race had once risen from the satellite's 4 jungles, only to disappear quietly long before the first human explorer set foot on the tiny world. Little was known of them save that they left a number of impressive monuments, and that they were one of the many races which had aspired to the stars, only to have their desperate reach fall short. That's sad. Now all that remained were the mounds and foliage-clad clumps formed by jungle-covered buildings. Though they had sunk back into the dust, their artifacts and their world continued to serve an important purpose. Strange cries and barely perceptible moans sounded from every tree and corpse. Hoots and growls and strange mutterings issued from creatures content to remain concealed in the dense undergrowth. Whenever dawn broke over Moon the 4th, heralding one of its long days, especially feral chorus of shrieks and weirdly modulated screams would resound through the thick mist. Even stranger, sounds surged continually from one particular place. Here lay the most impressive of those edifices, which a vanished race had raised toward the heavens. It was a temple, a roughly pyramidal structure so colossal that it seemed impossible it could have been built without the aid of modern gravitonic construction techniques, yet all evidence pointed only to simple machines, hand technology, and perhaps devices alien and long lost. Sound familiar? While the science of this moon's inhabitants had led them to a dead end as far as off-world travel was concerned, they had produced several discoveries in which certain ways surpassed similar Imperial accomplishments, one of which involved a still unexplained method of cutting and transporting gargantuan blocks of stone from the crust of the moon. Quiet, phone. From these monstrous blocks of solid rock, the massive temple had been constructed. The jungle had scaled even its soaring crest, clothing it in rich green and brown. Only near its base and the temple front did the jungle slide away completely to reveal a long, dark entrance cut by its builders and enlarged to suit the needs of the structure's present occupants. A tiny machine, its smooth metal sides and silvery hue incongruous amidst the all-pervasive green, appeared in the forest. It hummed like a fat, swollen beetle as it conveyed its cluster of passengers toward the open temple base. Crossing a considerable clearing, it was soon swallowed up by the dark maw in front of the massive structure, leaving the jungle once more in the paws and claws of invisible squallers and screechers. The original builders would never have recognized the interior of their temple. Seamed metal had replaced rock, and poured paneling did service for the chamber division in place of wood, nor would they have been able to see the buried layers excavated into the rock below, layers which contain hangar upon hangar linked by powerful elevators. A land speeder came to a gradual stop within the temple, whose first level was the uppermost of those ship-filled hangars. Its engine died obediently as the vehicle settled into the ground. A noisy cluster of humans waiting nearby ceased their conversation and rushed toward the craft. Fortunately, Leia Organa quickly emerged from the speeder, or the man who reached it first might have pulled her bodily from it, so great was his delight at the sight of her. He settled for giving her a smothering hug as his companions called for their own greetings. "You're safe. We feared you'd been killed." Abruptly he composed himself, stepped away from her, and executed a formal bow. "When we heard about Alderaan, we were afraid that you were lost along with the rest of the population." "All that is past history, Commander Willard," she said. "We have a future to live for. Alderaan and its people are gone." Her voice turned bitter cold, frightening in so delicate-looking a person. "We must see that such a thing does not happen again." "We don't have time for our sorrows, Commander," she continued briskly. "The battle station surely has tracked us here." Solo started to protest, but she shut him up with logic and a stern look. "That's the only explanation for the ease of our escape. They only sent 4 TIE fighters after us. They could have easily launched 100. Solo had no reply for that, but continued to fume silently. Then Leia gestured at R2-D2. "You must use the information locked in this R2 droid to form a plan of attack. It's our only hope." "The station itself is more powerful than anyone suspected." Her voice dropped. "If the data does not yield a weakness, there will be no stopping them." Luke was then treated to a sight unique in his experience, unique in most men's. Several rebel technicians walked up to R2-D2, positioned themselves around him, and gently hoisted him in their arms. This was the first and probably last time he would ever see a robot being carried respectfully by men. Theoretically, no weapon could penetrate the exceptionally dense stone of the ancient temple, but Luke had seen the shattered remains of Alderaan and knew that for those in the incredible battle station, the Empire moon would present simply another abstract problem in mass energy conversion. Little R2-D2 rested comfortably in a place of honor, his body radiating computer and data bank hookups like a metal hairdo. That sounds hilarious. On an array of screens and readouts nearby, the technical information stored on this microscopic record tape within the robot's brain was being played out. Hours of it, diagrams, charts, statistics. First, the rush of material was slowed and digested by more sophisticated computer minds. Then the most critical information was turned over to human analysts for detailed evaluation. All the while, C-3PO stood close to R2, marveling at how so much complex data could be stored in the mind of so simple a droid. The central briefing room was located deep within the bowels, of the temple. The long, low-ceiling auditorium was dominated by a raised dais and huge electronic display at the screen at its far end. Pilots, navigators, and a sprinkling of R2 units filled the seats. Impatient and feeling very out of place, Han Solo and Chewbacca stood as far away from the stage with its assemblage of officers and senators as possible. Solo scanned the crowd, searching for Luke. Despite some common sense entreaties, the crazy kid had gone and joined the regular pilots. He didn't see Luke, but he recognized the princess as she talked somberly with some bemedaled oldster. When a tall, dignified gentleman with too many deaths on his soul moved to stand by the far side of the screen, Solo turned his attention to him, as did everyone else in the room. As soon as an expectant silence had gripped the crowd, General Jan Dodonna adjusted the tiny mic on his chest and indicated the small group seated close to him. "You all know these people," he intoned with quiet power. "They are the senators and generals whose worlds have given us support, whether open or covert. What? They have come with us in what may well prove to be the decisive moment." He let his gaze touch many in the crowd, and none who were so favored remained unmoved. "The Imperial battle station you now all have heard of is approaching from the far side of Yavin and its sun. That gives us a little extra time, but it must be stopped once and for all before it can reach this moon, before it can bring its weaponry to bear on us as it did on Alderaan." A murmur, dang it, ran through the crowd at the mention of that world so callously obliterated. "The station," Dodonna went on, "is heavily shielded and mounts more firepower than half the Imperial fleet. But its defenses were designed to fend off large-scale capital ship assaults. A small 1- or 2-man fighter should be able to slip through its defensive screens." A slim, supple man who resembled an older version of Han Solo rose. Dodonna acknowledged his presence. "What is it, Red Leader?" The man gestured toward the display screen, which showed a computer portrait of the battle station. "Pardon me for asking, sir, but what good are snub fighters going to do against that?" Dodonna considered. "Well, the Empire doesn't think a one-man fighter is any threat to anything except another small ship like a TIE fighter, or they would have provided tighter screens. Apparently they're convinced that their defensive weaponry can fend off any light attacks. But an analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia has revealed what we think is a weakness in the station's design. A big ship couldn't get near it, but an X or Y-wing fighter might. It's a small thermal exhaust port. Its size belies its importance, as it appears to be an unshielded shaft that runs directly into the main reactor system powering the station. Since this serves as an emergency outlet for waste heat in the event of a reactor overproduction, its usefulness would be eliminated by particle shielding. A direct hit would initiate a chain reaction that would destroy the station." Mutterings of disbelief ran through the room. The more experienced the pilot, the greater his expressed disbelief. "I didn't say your approach would be easy," Dodonna admonished them. He gestured at the screen. "You must maneuver straight down in the shaft, level off in the trench, and skim the surface to this point. The target is only 2 meters across." Why does everybody hit Artemis?
I brought the light bulb.
Did you bring Bronte in here, or was she already in here? Okay. I couldn't tell. Want to toss me a light bulb?
I'm being flashed. You want regular or LED?
Which one would give them the most heat? Huh. I don't know. Where was I? It will take a precise hit at exactly 90 degrees to reach the reactor systemization. Only a direct hit will start the complete reaction. I said the port wasn't particle shielded. However, it is completely ray shielded. That means no energy beams. You will have to use proton torpedoes. A few of the pilots laughed humorously. One of them was a teenage fighter jockey seated next to Luke, who bore the unlikely name of Wedge Antilles. R2-D2 was there also, seated next to another R2 unit, who emitted a long whistle of hopelessness. "A 2-meter target at maximum speed with a torpedo yet?" Antilles snorted. "That's impossible, even for the computer." But it's not impossible, Luke protested. I used the bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than 2 meters. Is that so? A rakishly uniformed youth noted derisively. Tell me, when you were going after your particular varmint, were there 1,000 other, what did you call it, womp rats armed with power rifles firing up at you? He shook his head sadly. With all that firepower on the station directed at us, this will take a little more than barnyard marksmanship, believe me. As if to confirm Antilles' pessimism, Dodonna indicated a string of lights on the ever-changing schematic. Take special note of these emplacements. There's a heavy concentration of firepower on the latitudinal axes. Axes? I don't know. As well as several dense circumpolar clusters. Also, their field generators will probably create a lot of distortion, especially in and around the trench. I figure that maneuverability in that sector will be less than 0.3. This produced more murmurs and a few groans from the assembly. Remember, the general went on, you must achieve a direct hit. Yellow squadron will cover for red on the first run, green will cover blue on the second. Any questions? A muted buzz filled the room. One man stood, lean and handsome, too much so it seemed to be ready to throw away his life for something as abstract as freedom. What if both runs fail? What happens after that? Dodonna smiled tightly. There won't be any after that. The man nodded slowly, understandingly, and sat down. Anyone else? Silence now, pregnant with expectation. What? Who's the father? Then man your ships, and may the force be with you. Like oil draining from a shallow pot, the seated ranks of men, women, and machines rose and flowed towards the exit. Elevators hummed busily, lifting more and more deadly shapes from buried depths to the staging area in the primary temple at Temple Hangar as Luke, 3PO, and R2-D2 walked toward the hangar entrance. Neither the bustling flight crews nor the pilots performing final checkouts or the massive sparks thrown off as power couplings were disconnected captured Luke's attention at the moment. Instead, it was held by the activity of two far more familiar figures. Solo and Chewbacca were loading a pile of small strong boxes onto an armored land speeder. They were completely absorbed with this activity, ignoring the preparations going on all around them. Solo glanced up briefly as Luke and the robots approached them, then returned to his holding. Luke simply watched sadly, conflicting emotions careening confusedly off one another inside of him. Solo was cocky, reckless, intolerant, and smug. He was also brave to a fault, instructive, and unfailingly cheery. That combination made for a confusing friend, but a friend nonetheless. If only Michael could be like that. You got your reward, Luke finally observed, indicating the boxes. Solo nodded once. And you're leaving then? That's right, kid. I've got some old debts to pay off, and even if I didn't, I don't think I'd be fool enough to stick around here. He eyed Luke appraisingly. You're pretty good in a scrap, kid. Why don't you come with us? I could use you. The mercenary gleam in Solo's eyes only made Luke mad. Why don't you look around and see something besides yourself for a change? You know what's going to happen here, what they're up against. They could use a good pilot, but you're turning your back on them. Solo didn't appear upset at Luke's tirade. What good's a reward if you're not around to spend it? Attacking that battle station is an idea of courage, more like suicide. Yeah, take care of yourself, Han, Luke said quietly, turning to leave. But I guess that's what you're best at, isn't it? He started back into the hangar depths, flanked by the two droids. Solo stared after him, hesitated, then called, Hey, Luke! May the Force be with you. Luke looked back to see Solo wink at him. He waved. Sort of. Then he was swallowed up by the moving mechanics and machinery. Solo returned to his work, lifted a box, and stopped to see Chewbacca gazing fixedly at him. What are you staring at, Gruesome? I know what I'm doing. Get back to work. Slowly, I really expected him to wake up. Thank you. You know what's funny? Is they can't see any of this, but they can hear it. My mom has problems. You can see where I get my... oh, also this is Optimus Prime. Weirdness. Slowly, still eyeing his partner, the Wookiee... I like that I remember where I was that time, but all the other times I can't find it. See? The Wookiee returned to the task of loading the heavy crates. Sorrowful thoughts of Solo vanished when Luke saw the petite, slim figure standing by his ship. The ship he had been granted. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Princess Leia asked him. "It could be a deadly reward." Luke's eyes were filled with the sleek, venomous metal shape. More than anything. Then what's wrong? Luke looked back at her and shrugged. "It's Han. I thought he'd change his mind. I thought he'd join us." "A man must follow his own path," she told him, sounding like a senator now. "No one can choose it for him. Han Solo's priorities differ from ours. I wish it were otherwise, but I can't find it in my heart to condemn him." She stood on tiptoes, gave him a quick, almost embarrassed kiss, and turned to go. "May the Force be with you." "I only wish..." Luke murmured, dang it, to himself as he stared back to his ship. Ben were here. So intent was he on thoughts of Kenobi, the Princess and Han, that he didn't notice the larger figure which tightly locked onto his arm. He turned, his initial anger gone instantly in astonishment as he recognized the figure. "Luke!" the slightly older man exclaimed. "I don't believe it. How'd you get here? Are you going out with us?" "Biggs!" Luke embraced his friend warmly. "Of course, I'll be right up here with you." His smile faded slightly. "I haven't got a choice anymore." Then he brightened again. "Listen, I've got some stories to tell you." The steady whooping and laughing the two made was in marked contrast to the solemnity. I don't know. You know never mind, I am stupid. With which the other men and women in the hangar went about their business. Did you know you can actually see female pilots in A New Hope? They just couldn't show any of them dying during the attack on the Death Star. Because it'd be too sad. I don't know. So yay, all the women survived. I don't know. Okay, I'm done. With which the other men and women in the hangar went about their business. The commotion attracted the attention of an older, war-worn man known to the younger pilots only as Blue Leader. His face wrinkled with curiosity as he approached the two younger men. It was a face scorched by the same fire that flickered in his eyes, a blaze kindled not by revolutionary fervor, but by years of living through and witnessing far too much injustice. Behind that fatherly visage, a raging demon fought to escape. Soon, very soon, he would be free to let it loose. Now he was interested in these two young men, who in a few hours were likely to be particles of frozen meat floating about Yavin. One of them he recognized. "Aren't you Luke Skywalker? Have you been checked out on Incom T-65? "Sir," Biggs put in before his friend could reply, "Luke's the best bush pilot in the Outer Rim territories." The older man patted Luke reassuringly on the back as they studied his waiting ship. "Something to be proud of. I've got over 1,000 hours in an Incom Skyhopper myself." He paused a moment before going on. "I met your father once when I was just a boy, Luke. He was a great pilot. You'll do all right out there if you've got half your father's skill. You'll do a dang better, sight better than all right." "Thank you, sir. I'll try. There's not much difference control-wise between an X-Wing and T-65 Blue Leader went on, and a Skyhopper." His smile turned ferocious, except the payloads of a somewhat different nature. "Oh, okay. I gotcha." He left them and hurried toward his own ship. Luke had 100 questions to ask him, and no time for even one. "I've got to get aboard my own boat, Luke. Listen, you'll tell me your stories when we come back, all right? All right, I told you I'd make it here someday, Biggs. You did." His friend was moving toward a cluster of waiting fighters, adjusting his flight suit. "It's going to be like old times, Luke. We're a couple of shooting stars that can't be stopped." Luke laughed. They used to reassure themselves with that cry when they piloted starships of sandhills and dead logs behind the flanking pitted buildings of Anchorhead years and years ago. Once more Luke turned toward his ship, admiring its deadly lines. Despite Blue Leader's assurances, he had to admit that it didn't look much like an Incom Skyhopper. R2-D2 was being snuggled into the R2 socket behind the fighter cockpit. A forlorn metal figure stood below, watching the operation and shuffling nervously about. "Hold on tight," C-3PO was cautioning the smaller robot. "You've got to come back. If you don't come back, who am I going to have to yell at?" For 3PO, that query amounted to an overwhelming outburst of emotion. He's got a point. R2 beeped confidently down at his friend, however, as Luke mounted the cockpit entry. Farther down the hangar, he saw Blue Leader already set in his acceleration chair and signaling to his ground crew. Another roar was added to the monstrous din, filling the hangar area as ship after ship activated its engines. In that enclosed rectangle of temple, the steady thunder was overpowering. Slipping into the cockpit seat, Luke studied the various controls as ground attendants began wiring him via cords and umbilicals into the ship. His confidence increased steadily. The instrumentation was necessarily simplified and, as Blue Leader had indicated, much like his old Skyhopper. Something patted his helmet. He glanced left to see the crew chief leaning close. He had to shout to be heard above the deafening howl of multiple engines. "That R2 unit of yours seems a little beat up. Do you want a new one?" Luke glanced briefly back at the secure droid before replying. R2 looked like a permanent piece of the fighter. "Not on your life. That droid and I have been through a lot together. All secure, R2?" The droid replied with a reassuring beep. As the ground chief jumped clear, Luke commenced the final checkout of all instruments. It slowly occurred to him that he and the others were about to attempt. Or what he and the others were about to attempt. Sorry. Wow, this one's been a lot longer than the other ones. I wonder why. Where was I? Not that his personal feelings could override his decision to join them. He was no longer an individual functioning slowly to satisfy his personal needs. Something now bound him to every other man and woman in this hangar. All around him, scattered scenes of goodbye were taking place, some serious, some kidding, all with the true emotion of the moment masked by efficiency. Luke turned away from where one pilot left a mechanic, possibly a sister or wife, or just a friend with a sharp, passionate kiss. He wondered how many of them had their own little debts to settle with the Empire. Something crackled in his helmet. In response, he touched a small lever. The ship began to roll forward slowly, but with increasing speed, toward the gaping mouth of the temple. Okay, so that was a little bit longer than I normally read. I wonder why. I mean, it was about the same number of pages. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Although my throat has been kind of dry. Anyway. We're getting close to the end. This next chapter, I checked, is about 31 pages long. So I may end up cutting that into 2 episodes. Let me know if I should or shouldn't. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'm about to give Iggy a bath, and I'm probably gonna practice my lightsaber some more. Light bulbs for the turtles. Anyway, let me know if you guys are excited for the end. I certainly am. And I wonder how far we can get in this book before The Force Awakens comes out. Oh, I can't wait to see that movie. I'm going to see it every single day off that I have. I can guarantee it. Okay, that's enough rambling before it gets to be way too long of a video. Until next time, goodbye everybody. Seriously, go watch the movie when it comes out.